In the 41st millennium, there are no gods, only beings powerful enough to be mistaken for them. The Imperium had survived 10,000 years of heresy, Xenos incursions, and demonic corruption by one simple doctrine: purge first, question never. They had faced ancient evils that consumed stars and demons born from humanity's darkest impulses. Surely one creature, one blood-drinking anomaly that fell screaming through a warp rift, was just another abomination to be cleansed with fire and faith. They could not have been more catastrophically wrong. The underhive of Tertium Majoris had seen darkness before. 16 billion souls crammed into rusted spires that clawed toward a polluted sky, while below, in the labyrinthine depths, the dregs of humanity fought and died in perpetual shadow. Gang wars, mutant infestations, and the occasional Genestealer cult were routine problems for the Adeptus Arbites. But when the warp rift tore open 3 kilometers below the surface, spilling a single figure into the toxic sump water of the lower levels, something fundamentally different entered the Emperor's domain. Alucard rose from the filth, red coat somehow immaculate, despite the centuries of accumulated refuse coating everything else. His crimson eyes opened behind orange-tinted glasses, taking in the impossible architecture. Gothic brutalism stretched beyond reason, pipes thick as hab blocks carrying waste and promethium through intestinal corridors lit by flickering sodium lamps. The air tasted of rust, desperation, and something else, something alive in a way that defied conventional reality. "How delightful," he murmured, his voice a cultured purr edged with ancient malice. A new hunting ground. He could feel it immediately. Something was wrong with his existence here. The Schrödinger paradox that allowed him omnipresence, the ability to exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, had collapsed into singular manifestation. He was here, only here. The sensation was almost novel, almost limiting. The warp, he would learn, operated on different principles than quantum observation. This reality bent to faith and emotion, not paradox and perception. Behind him, the rift sealed with a sound like reality screaming. Forward, through corroded archways and past the skeletal remains of ancient machinery, he heard heartbeats. Thousands of them. Millions. A feast sprawling upward through layers of civilization built upon civilization's corpse. His smile widened, revealing fangs. The first humans he encountered were underhive gangers, 12 men and women wrapped in makeshift armor of scavenged flak plating and chainmail, las pistols and crude autoguns clutched in calloused hands. They'd been tracking a mutant pack when they found him instead, standing in a pool of contaminated water, looking entirely too clean and far too wrong. "Oi, you lost, fancy man." The leader, a scarred woman with a bionic eye, leveled her autogun at Alucard's chest. "Wrong place to be wearing colors like that. Strip 'em, or we'll—" She never finished. Alucard moved with speed that shouldn't exist, crossing 10 meters before her finger could tighten on the trigger. His hand wrapped around her throat, lifting her off the ground as his companions opened fire. Bullets struck his torso, his head, his limbs, punching through fabric and flesh with wet impacts. He didn't even flinch. "Tell me," Alucard said, ignoring the rounds perforating his body, watching with detached curiosity as the wounds sealed instantly, bullets pushed out by regenerating tissue. "What manner of world is this? What delightful flavors of despair do you cultivate here?" The woman choked, eyes wide with terror as she watched his injuries vanish. "Monster, mutant, heretic." None of those, I'm afraid." He dropped her, watching the gang scatter in panic. One, braver or more foolish than the rest, drew a chainsword, its teeth roaring to life with a spray of promethium exhaust. The ganger charged with a scream of fury. Alucard caught the spinning blade barehanded, the teeth shredding his palm to bone before regenerating instantly. He looked almost disappointed. Is this truly the best you can offer? He pulled the chain's ward free, examined it with academic interest, then casually tossed it aside. Where I come from, the Catholic Church fielded better sport than you lot. He let them run. Hunting prey too weak held no appeal, and besides, he needed information. The architecture, the technology, even the air here sang of warfare on a scale that made his previous existence seem provincial. This was a universe that had industrialized suffering across galaxies. Finally, Alucard whispered to the darkness, his shadows beginning to writhe around him in response to his will. At least that still functioned properly. A war worth fighting. Above, in the upper hive, proximity alarms screamed as Auspex arrays detected the warp rift's signature. Within the hour, inquisitorial agents would descend into the underhive. Within a day, the Ordo Hereticus would declare Tertium Majoris under formal investigation. And within a week, Alucard would learn that in the 41st millennium, being the monster wasn't enough. You had to be the right kind of monster. He walked deeper into the underhive, following the scent of blood and the sound of prayers offered to something called the God Emperor. His coat billowed behind him despite the still air, shadows pooling in his wake like liquid darkness. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the distinctive bark of bolter fire, weapons that launched explosive ammunition designed to kill things far more durable than baseline humans. Yes, Alucard breathed, feeling something approaching excitement for the first time in decades. Show me what fresh hells you've prepared. The underhive swallowed him whole, and the darkness welcomed its newest predator. But in the 41st millennium, even predators were prey to something worse. The Inquisitorial Task Force arrived with the subtlety of an orbital bombardment. 6 Valkyrie assault carriers screamed through the upper hive's transit channels, their turbo engines drowning out the endless mechanical groaning of Tertium Majoris's infrastructure. Inside the lead transport, Inquisitor Eisenhorn, no relation to the legendary Gregor, reviewed pick captures of the warp rift with mounting concern. The woman was middle-aged by Imperium standards, face scarred by acid burns that no augmetic surgery had fully corrected, her bionic left hand resting on the pommel of a power sword whose hilt bore the inquisitorial rosette. Warp signature collapsed after 6 seconds, reported her interrogator, a young man named Vex whose augmetic eyes flickered with data streams. No demon manifestation detected, no secondary corruption vectors. Just one entity. Singular biological signature. Classification unknown. Unknown? Eisenhorn's organic eye narrowed. Elaborate. The Auspex readings are contradictory, ma'am. It registers as human, non-human, alive, dead, singular, and... Vex hesitated. Multiple, as if one being contains thousands of life signs. Eisenhorn made the sign of the Aquila across her chest. Demonic possession. Has to be. A demon wearing human skin. Perhaps, but the warp signature faded completely. Whatever came through isn't actively drawing on immaterium energy. Then it's a different kind of abomination. She stood, addressing the 12 battle sisters of the Order of the Bloody Rose, who occupied the transport's cargo bay. Their power armor gleamed crimson and black, each bearing a bolter held with religious reverence. Sisters, we hunt something that bleeds but does not die. Standard doctrine, flamers first, blessed round second, orbital bombardment if we cannot contain it. The Emperor protects, they intoned in unison. The Valkyries descended into the underhive through massive ventilation shafts, their searchlights carving through centuries of accumulated smog. They landed in a relatively stable zone, a massive plaza that had once been a marketplace, now home to squatter settlements built from corrugated metal and desperation. The residents scattered like roaches from light as the inquisitorial forces deployed. Eisenhorn activated her Voxcaster. All units spread out. Locate the entity. Do not engage until I give explicit authorization. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we... A scream cut through the Vox channel. Sister Magdalene's voice, distorted by terror and static. Contact, northwest quadrant. Emperor, preserve us, it's... The channel went dead. Eisenhorn ran, her retinue following in disciplined formation. They found Magdalene 300 meters away, her bolter lying empty beside her, its ammunition exhausted. The sister herself knelt in the filth, trembling, her helmet removed to reveal a face drained of color. Before her stood Alucard, examining her bolt pistol with casual interest, shadows writhing around his feet like living things. Fascinating, he said, turning the weapon over in his hands. Chemical propellant accelerating a self-contained explosive projectile. Crude compared to modern firearms, yet effective against targets wearing... What did she call it? Power armor? He glanced at Magdalene with something approaching respect. You actually hurt me with these, briefly. Eisenhorn raised her power sword, its blade crackling to life with disruptor energy. In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, identify yourself, abomination. Alucard's gaze shifted to her, and Eisenhorn felt the weight of something ancient and predatory settle on her soul. His eyes glowed like coals behind orange-tinted glasses, and when he smiled, his fangs caught the searchlight beams. Abomination. Yes, I suppose that's accurate enough. He dropped the bolter, letting it clatter against stone. I am Alucard, no life king, no life. The bird of Hermes is my name, eating my wings to make me tame. He spread his arms wide, coat billowing. And you, little zealot, you reek of faith so absolute it borders on psychosis. Tell me, is your emperor truly worth such devotion? Heresy! Sister Magdalene found her voice, scrambling for her weapon. Blasphemy against the God Emperor is... Alucard was suddenly beside her, having moved faster than human perception could track. He crouched, tilting his head like a curious predator. You believe with every fiber of your being. I can taste it. Such conviction. He inhaled deeply. Such delicious, unshakable faith. It's almost arousing. Eisenhorn fired her plasma pistol. The superheated bolt struck Alucard's center mass, burning through his torso and leaving a hole the size of a fist. He staggered backward, looking down at the wound with genuine surprise as smoke rose from seared flesh. Now that, he said, watching the injury regenerate with visible fascination, had some bite to it. The remaining battle sisters opened fire. Bolter rounds and plasma bursts converged on Alucard's position, tearing him apart in a storm of explosive force and heat. His body disintegrated, limbs severed, torso perforated, head nearly separated from his shoulders. He collapsed into the shadows, coat shredded, blood pooling in impossible quantities. For 3 seconds there was silence. Then the blood began to flow backward. Alucard reformed from the pool of gore, shadows knitting his body together, as if reality itself rewound. He stood, straightening his coat with an expression of profound satisfaction. Oh, yes, yes, you can actually hurt me here. Do you understand what a gift that is? Eisenhorn felt ice settle in her stomach. She'd fought demons, heretics, and Xenos abominations across a dozen worlds. She'd seen things that would break lesser minds. But this creature, this vampire, for she recognized the ancient legends now, wore his immortality like a comfortable coat, and her weapons, blessed by the ecclesiarchy itself, merely entertained him. What are you? She whispered. I told you, I'm a monster. Alucard's smile widened impossibly. But the real question, Inquisitor, is what are you? What is this Imperium that arms its faithful with such wonderful toys? What enemies have you faced that require such enthusiasm and violence? He drew his own weapon then, a massive handgun, black chrome and silver, far too large for any human to wield. The Casul. He pointed it lazily at the nearest battle sister. I could kill you all. Right now. It would be effortless. His finger rested on the trigger. But I'm curious. This Emperor you worship, is he real? Or is he just another myth you've convinced yourselves matters? Eisenhorn activated her Vox speed. All units, fall back. Request immediate orbital support. Target designation, this entire sector. Authorization Eisenhorn Theta 9. Alucard lowered his weapon, laughing, a sound like breaking glass and distant screams. Orbital bombardment for little old me. I'm flattered, but if you're going to kill me... He holstered the Casul, spreading his arms wide. You'll need to get much, much more creative. The shadows around him expanded, deepening, and for just a moment Eisenhorn saw something within that darkness. Shapes writhing, millions of eyes opening, souls pressed together in an eternal scream. Then it was gone, and Alucard was walking away, hands in his pockets, whistling something that sounded like a funeral dirge. I'll be waiting, he called over his shoulder. Send your best. Send your space marines, your assassins, your champions. Send me something worth destroying. He vanished into the Underhive's depths, leaving the Inquisitorial task force standing in stunned silence among the spent bolt casings and scorch marks. Eisenhorn made the sign of the Aquila again, but this time her hands trembled. Emperor preserve us, she whispered. What have we unleashed? The Inquisitorial Fortress Monastery on Turium Majoris had stood for 3 centuries, its adamantium walls carved with litanies against corruption, and its halls patrolled by servo-skulls programmed to detect heretical thought. In its central strategic chamber, Inquisitor Eisenhorn stood before a hololith display showing the Underhive's Warren-like structure, red markers indicating Alucard's last known positions. Except the markers multiplied with each report, 17 sightings in 6 hours, spread across 40 kilometers of Underhive territory. Impossible, muttered Interrogator Vex, his augmetic eyes processing data faster than human cognition allowed. No single entity can move that quickly. Either we're tracking multiple targets, or it wants us confused. Eisenhorn stared at the display, jaw clenched. She'd sent 3 more kill teams into the Underhive. 2 had returned carrying their wounded. The 3rd hadn't reported in for 90 minutes. What's the status on the Astartes request? The Crimson Fists have a strike cruiser in system. They're deploying a tactical squad, 10 Space Marines, led by Sergeant Corvin. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Eisenhorn had seen Space Marines in action before, post-human warriors whose very existence defied natural law, gene-forged from the Emperor's own genetic template. If anything could match this vampire's regenerative capabilities, it was them. And the orbital batteries. Charged and awaiting your authorization. The Lord Governor isn't pleased about potentially destroying 16 city blocks, but he's authorized collateral damage up to acceptable civilian losses. Define acceptable. 2 million souls, give or take. Eisenhorn closed her eyes. The calculus of imperial justice weigh 2 million lives against the potential spread of a warp-born abomination across the entire planet. The mathematics were cold and absolute. She'd made such calculations before. It never became easier. Hold the bombardment. Let the Astartes make first contact. If they fail, she opened her eyes. We glass the entire Underhive. Deep below, in corridors where imperial authority was a distant rumor and survival was the only law, Alucard hunted. Not for sustenance, though the blood here tasted of pollutants and malnutrition, painting a portrait of generational suffering he found oddly poetic. No, he hunted for information, and the gangers, cultists and mutants of the Underhive, proved remarkably talkative once properly motivated. A demonstration of his regeneration, a few parlor tricks with shadow manipulation, and tongues loosened with gratifying speed. He learned of the Imperium, a theocratic dictatorship spanning 1,000,000 worlds, held together by fanatical faith in a corpse god sustained on a golden throne. He learned of the Warp, that roiling sea of psychic energy where demons cavorted and human souls dissolved like sugar in acid. He learned of the Space Marines, the Inquisition, the endless wars against Xeno's horrors and heretical rebellions. 10,000 years of this, Alucard murmured, sitting cross-legged atop a pile of corpses, cultists who'd tried to convert him to something called the Ruinous Powers. Their blood pooled around him, and he could feel it calling, trying to connect with the reservoir of souls contained within his being. 3,424,667 souls consumed across centuries of existence, compressed into his singular form. And the Warp wanted them. He could feel it now, a pressure against his consciousness, like fingers probing at a locked door. The Immaterium recognized the soul weight he carried, mistook it for something demonic, something useful. In this universe, his greatest strength was also a vulnerability. Every soul he'd consumed, every life he'd taken and bound to himself, was potential fuel for whatever entities swam in that psychic ocean. Problematic, he admitted to the darkness. Can't release my familiars without risk of contamination. Can't access my full power without exposing myself to, what did that cultist call them? The Chaos Gods. He laughed, the sound echoing off corroded metal walls. Gods, always with the gods. Can't humanity ever advance past needing imaginary fathers? His rumination was interrupted by the distinctive thud, thud of heavy footfalls, too heavy for normal humans, too rhythmic for industrial machinery. Alucard stood, shadows coiling around him in anticipation. Through the darkness emerged 10 figures, each standing over 7 feet tall in crimson power armor edged with gold. Their armor bore the iconography of a clenched fist, and their helms displayed glowing eye lenses that scanned the corridor with tactical precision. Space Marines, the Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's finest. Sergeant Corvin stepped forward. His armor scarred from countless campaigns, a chainsword mag locked to his hip, and a bolter held ready in ceramite gauntleted hands. When he spoke, his voice was a bass rumble, amplified by vox grills. Unknown entity, you have been judged heretical and are condemned to immediate execution. Surrender and die quickly, or resist and die screaming. The Emperor offers no other mercy. Alucard grinned, feeling genuine excitement for the first time since his arrival. Now these are proper warriors. Look at you, post-human perfection, living weapons wrapped in armor and faith. He took a step forward, hands still in his pockets. Tell me, do you bleed? Can you die? Or are you just more puppets dancing on strings of dogma? Fire, Corvin commanded. 10 bolters opened up simultaneously. The corridor became a storm of explosive death, each bolt round detonating with enough force to pulp unarmored flesh. Alucard's body disintegrated under the onslaught, reduced to scattered meat and bone fragments painted across the walls. The Space Marines maintained fire discipline, switching to controlled bursts after the initial volley. Corvin raised a fist, signaling ceasefire. They watched the remains, waiting for any sign of regeneration. The blood stirred. Impressive rate of fire, Alucard's voice emanated from the pooled gore. "But you're thinking in conventional terms. Let me show you something truly unconventional." He reformed not from the blood pool, but from the shadows, stepping out of the darkness behind the Space Marine formation, fully intact, coat pristine, glasses reflecting their turning forms. "You're fighting a creature that exists across multiple states of being. Destroying the body is meaningless when consciousness persists elsewhere." Brother Talus, the closest Marine, spun with superhuman speed, Chainsword roaring to life. He brought it down in a killing arc that would have bisected an orc warboss. Alucard caught the spinning blade between his palms, blood spraying as the teeth chewed through flesh. "Good," Alucard hissed, his eyes blazing crimson. "Give me a real fight." He pulled, yanking the Space Marine off balance with strength that matched gene-forged muscle. His shadows erupted outward like living tentacles, wrapping around Brother Talus's limbs. The Marine triggered his armor's emergency purge systems, explosive bolts detonating to shed the compromised plating. But the shadows followed, seeping through ceramite joints and finding the vulnerable flesh beneath. Corvin fired point-blank into Alucard's head. The vampire's skull exploded in a spray of brain matter and bone. He staggered backward, momentarily disoriented. The damage was too severe to regenerate instantly, even for him. The Space Marines pressed their advantage. Brother Castiel drew a plasma pistol and fired 3 shots into Alucard's torso, superheating his internal organs to slag. Brother Maxim activated his power fist, the disruption field crackling as he drove it into Alucard's chest cavity, disintegrating everything the fist touched. Alucard collapsed, his form a ravaged mess of burned meat and shattered bone. The Marines formed a perimeter, weapons trained on the corpse, waiting. "Status," Corvin voxed to his squad. "Target neutralized, Brother Sergeant." "Awaiting confirmation of—" The corpse laughed. It was a wet, gurgling sound, half drowned in blood, but unmistakably laughter. Alucard's ruined jaw reformed enough to speak. "You magnificent bastards, actually hurt me." His body began regenerating, but slower now. The plasma burns resisted healing, the disruption field damage taking precious seconds to reverse. He was learning the limits of his regeneration in this universe. Certain weapons, certain energies, could temporarily overwhelm even his immortality. "Flamer," Corvin ordered. "Purge it completely." Brother Paris stepped forward, heavy flamer raised. Blessed promethium erupted in a 15-meter cone, temperatures hot enough to melt plasteel. Alucard's scream was equal parts agony and ecstasy as his body burned, shadows evaporating under holy fire. But he didn't die. Instead, he sank into the floor itself, his form dissolving into the darkness of the Underhive's eternal shadow. His voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "I'm beginning to understand this place. Faith has power here. Your Emperor's blessing makes your weapons bite deeper, burn hotter. How delightfully ironic. I finally find worthy opponents and their zealots." The Space Marines formed a defensive circle, scanning for contacts. Their Auspex arrays showed nothing. No heat signature, no movement, no life signs. "We need to report this," Corvin said. "The target cannot be destroyed through conventional means. Requesting inquisitorial classification, upgrade to demon host level threat." Above them, in the darkness of the vaulted Underhive ceiling, Alucard clung to the shadows like a bat, watching them with burning eyes. His body ached, the closest he'd felt to genuine pain in decades. The Space Marines had hurt him, forced him to retreat, proven they could damage even his regeneration. It was wonderful. "Yes," he whispered to himself, "this universe will do nicely." The decision to release his familiars came not from necessity, but from curiosity. Alucard had retreated to the deepest reaches of the Underhive, places where reality grew thin, where the warp's influence bled through corroded bulkheads like spiritual radiation. Here, in chambers filled with the screaming of ancient machinery and the moaning of the mad, he could feel the immaterium pressing against his consciousness with increasing insistence. 3 million souls. An army compressed into singular flesh. In his original universe, releasing them was a trump card, overwhelming force that could devastate armies and level cities. Here, in the 41st millennium, where the warp hungered for psychic energy and demon-possessed souls writhed in the void between realities. Releasing that torrent of bound spirits was playing with ammunition stored next to an open flame. But Alucard had never been cautious. He sat in the center of what had once been a waste reclamation facility, now a cathedral of rust and failure, where pipes the size of hab blocks hung broken and silent. Around him, he drew symbols in his own blood, not the 8-pointed stars he'd seen in the cultist dens, but older signs, sigils from Earth's forgotten occult traditions, protection circles, binding runes, attempts to quarantine what he was about to unleash from the warp's corrupting influence. "Let's see if you can take what's mine," he murmured, closing his eyes. The release began slowly. A trickle first. 10 souls. 20. 50. They manifested as shadowy figures, transparent echoes of their former lives. Medieval peasants, Victorian nobles, Nazi soldiers, modern mercenaries, centuries of victims bound to his being, each one a fragment of stolen existence. And the warp noticed. Alucard felt it immediately, pressure building like a psychic dam about to burst. The souls he'd released flickered, their forms distorting as something else reached for them through the veil between realities. Colors that shouldn't exist bled into the shadows. Whispers in languages that predated human speech echoed through the chamber. The temperature dropped, then spiked, then became meaningless as physical laws began negotiating with belief made manifest. "Such delicious torment," a voice boomed from nowhere and everywhere, layered with the screams of dying worlds. "Souls unbound, ripe for claiming. Give them to us, vampire. Let them feed the ever-chosen." Corn. Even without formal introduction, Alucard recognized the entity, or at least recognized what it represented. Violence incarnate. War made conscious. Every drop of blood spilled in anger across the galaxy, fueling an entity that existed purely to see more blood spilled. "Tempting," Alucard said, watching his familiars writhe as demonic influence tried to subsume them. "But they're my toys. I don't share well with others." He pulled the souls back, reabsorbing them with an effort that felt like swallowing broken glass. The warp resisted, trying to keep what it had touched. But Alucard's will was absolute. These souls were bound to him by something older than this universe's gods, by the fundamental metaphysics of vampirism and consumption. They were his, and nothing, not even chaos, would take them without permission. The withdrawal left him gasping, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. Vulnerability, actual cost for using his power. In his home universe, releasing and recalling familiars was effortless. Here, the warp's corruption required active resistance, constant vigilance against entities that saw his soul reservoir as an unlocked armory. Problematic, he admitted, wiping blood from his mouth. "Can't use my full strength without risking corruption. Can't regenerate indefinitely without drawing attention. And these space marines..." He smiled despite the frustration. "They can actually kill me if I'm careless." The sound of heavy machinery interrupted his contemplation. Through the darkness came the distinctive whine of suspensor engines, something large, heavily armored, and absolutely convinced of its righteous authority. Alucard stood, straightening his coat as searchlights pierced the gloom. An inquisitorial repressor, an armored transport built like a cathedral on treads, bristling with heavy bolters and flamer turrets. It ground to a halt 50 meters away, and from its reinforced doors emerged not just Inquisitor Eisenhorn, but a figure Alucard had only heard described in his interrogations of Underhive scum. A librarian of the Adeptus Astartes. The Space Marine wore midnight blue armor edged with silver runes that hurt to look at directly, protective wards against psychic assault. His helm bore a stylized third eye, and in his hands he carried a force staff crackling with barely contained warp energy. When he spoke, his voice resonated with power that went beyond mere sound. I am Epistolary Kalen of the Crimson Fists, 3rd Company. I have walked through the warp and returned. I have seen demons born and banished them screaming. He leveled his staff at Alucard. You are not of the Materium, creature. You stink of bound souls and stolen lives. Identify your patron god, or be destroyed as the abomination you are. Alucard tilted his head, genuinely intrigued. A psyker. How delightful. You can actually see what I am. He spread his arms. No patron gods, I'm afraid. No chaos worship, no demonic pacts. Just good old-fashioned vampirism, predation refined to an art form over centuries. Lies. Eisenhorn stepped forward, plasma pistol drawn. We detected warp manifestation at this location. You attempted to summon demons. I attempted to use my own power, Alucard interrupted, his tone hardening. And your precious warp tried to steal from me. Tell me, Inquisitor, in your Imperium, is it heresy to resist chaos? Or do you only purge those who submit to it? Kalen's psychic senses probed Alucard's nature, and what he found made him hesitate. The vampire registered as simultaneously living and dead, singular and multiple, bound to baseline reality, yet touching something beyond the warp entirely. His soul reservoir should have marked him as a greater demon, yet there was no taint of the ruinous powers, no corruption signature, no submission to the dark gods. You are an impossibility, Kalen said slowly. Your existence violates the fundamental laws of this reality. Then we have something in common, Alucard replied. Your emperor sits on a throne of gold, kept alive by the sacrifice of thousands of psychers daily. His corpse god consciousness binding the Imperium together through sheer force of collective delusion. And you call me impossible? Heresy! Eisenhorn fired her plasma pistol. The bolt struck Alucard's shoulder, vaporizing flesh and bone. He regenerated instantly, shadows knitting the wound closed faster than the injury could spread. Is it heresy to speak truth? Your emperor is dying, has been dying for 10,000 years. You're worshipping a corpse and calling it divine. Alucard's smile was cruel now, all pretense of civility abandoned. In my universe, we had a name for that, necrophilia. Kalen unleashed his psychic power. Warp energy manifested as lightning, arcing from his staff to Alucard's position. The vampire screamed as psychic fire burned through him, not physical flame, but something worse. Soul fire. The kind of attack that bypassed flesh entirely and struck at the essential being of a target. It hurt. God and monster and everything between. It hurt. Alucard collapsed to his knees, body smoking, blood boiling in his veins. The psychic assault had bypassed his regeneration, struck directly at the core of his existence. For a moment, just a fleeting instant, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Fear. Then rage followed, ancient and absolute. His shadows exploded outward with force that cracked the corroded floor, rising in writhing pillars that blotted out the searchlights. His voice became layered, multiplied, as if millions spoke in chorus. You dare touch what is mine. The souls within him stirred, pressing against the barriers of his will, demanding release. The warp sensed the disturbance, pressing harder against reality. Kalen felt it too, a weakening of the veil, demonic entities on the other side turning their attention toward this feast of bound spirits teetering on the edge of release. "Stand down!" Kalen shouted, not to Alucard but to Eisenhorn. "If we push him further, the breach will expand. Every soul he carries could become a doorway for—" "I don't care!" Eisenhorn's face was a mask of fanatical fury. "The Emperor demands purity. This creature is an abomination that must be purged." Alucard laughed through the pain, through the rage, through the intoxicating danger of teetering on the edge of catastrophic power release. "Choose, Inquisitor. Destroy me and risk a demonic incursion that will consume this entire hive. Or let me go, and admit your precious dogma isn't equipped to handle something truly other." The standoff held for 3 seconds that felt like eternity. Then Kalen made the choice. His psychic power shifted, forming a barrier between Eisenhorn and Alucard. "Stand down, Inquisitor. That's an order under Librarium authority." "You have no authority over—" "I have every authority when the alternative is a warp rift that consumes 16 billion souls." Kalen's voice was steel wrapped in ceramite. "This creature is dangerous, but controllable. Push him further, and we lose this entire world." Alucard slowly stood, pulling his shadows back under control, forcing the souls within him into quiescence. It took effort, more than it should have, more than was comfortable. The warp had touched his power, tasted it, and now wanted more. "Wise choice," he said, voice returning to normal. "I'll leave your hive. Hunt elsewhere. But understand this, I'm not your enemy, not unless you force me to be." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Librarian, that trick with the soul fire? Do it again, and I'll show you what 3 million angry ghosts can accomplish when properly motivated." He vanished into the shadows, leaving the inquisitorial forces in tense silence. Eisenhorn lowered her weapon, face pale. "We're letting it escape." "We're letting it leave," Kalen corrected. "There's a difference. And Inquisitor?" He met her gaze through his helmet's eye lenses. "Send word to the Ordo Malleus. This creature isn't chaos-tainted, but it's walking a razor's edge. If it falls—" He looked toward the darkness where Alucard had disappeared. "The demons will have an army." The message reached Alucard 3 weeks after his departure from Tertia Majoris. He'd been wandering the void between hive worlds aboard a commandeered rogue trader vessel, the crew now under his thrall, their minds bent to his will through careful application of telepathy and strategic bloodletting. The ship, Crimson Endeavor, drifted through the warp currents with minimal navigation, its Geller fields flickering as demons pressed against the barrier, separating reality from madness. Alucard stood in the observation dome, watching the Immaterium roil beyond the protective field, colors that violated sanity, shapes that existed in too many dimensions, entities that noticed him noticing them. The warp was chaos given form, and it recognized him as something tantalizingly close to kin, yet frustratingly distant from submission. The astropathic message came as psychic screaming directly into his mind, a sensation he'd grown accustomed to in this universe where thoughts could kill and faith could reshape physics. The astropath who received it collapsed immediately, blood streaming from every orifice, the psychic payload too potent for her fragile human mind to contain safely. But Alucard heard it clearly. Warrior of blood, drinker of souls, eternal hunter. The voice was brass and fury, the sound of 1 billion battlefields condensed into syllables. You who feast on slaughter yet refuse the feast I offer, come to Viridia Prime. Prove your strength or admit your cowardice. Khorne, the blood god himself, or at least a fraction of his consciousness capable of manifesting through the warp, had issued a direct challenge. Alucard felt his lips curl into a smile that would have terrified the vessel's crew had they been conscious enough to witness it. Finally, he murmured, "An invitation worth accepting." Viridia Prime was a war world in the truest sense, a planet locked in perpetual conflict between Imperial forces and a chaos warband calling themselves the Crimson Reavers. The planet's surface was a scarred hellscape of trench networks, bunker complexes, and no man's lands where millions died daily in grinding attrition. It had been this way for 17 years. Neither side could gain decisive advantage, and neither side would surrender. It was perfect. Alucard's shuttle descended through anti-aircraft fire, the pilot still enthralled but lucid enough to navigate, weaving between flak bursts and autocannon tracers. They landed in neutral territory, a blasted crater field where the dead outnumbered the living by orders of magnitude. Corpses in Imperial flak armor and chaos-corrupted power armor lay intermingled, frozen in their final moments of violence. He stepped out into the war, breathing in the scent of cordite, blood, and burning promethium. Artillery rumbled in the distance. Laser-gun fire crackled across the trenches. Somewhere nearby, a chaos cultist screamed prayers to the dark gods as Commissar's bolt pistol ended his devotion. "Magnificent," Alucard whispered. The ground before him split open, not through explosive or tectonic activity, but through sheer wrongness. Reality tore like rotten fabric, and from the wound stepped something that made his vampire nature recoil instinctively. A bloodthirster of Khorne, 12 feet of demonic muscle wrapped in brass armor, wielding an axe that wept molten rage and a whip that cracked with the screams of murdered gods. The demon's skull face regarded Alucard with burning coal eyes. When it spoke, its voice was the death rattle of civilizations. "The blood god sees you, vampire. He offers ascension. Become his champion, lead his legends, claim skulls for his throne and blood for his chalice." "Tempting," Alucard said, genuinely considering it. "Power, authority, endless warfare. In another life I might have accepted." He drew the Kasul, the massive handgun looking almost quaint compared to the demon's reality-warping presence. "But I've spent centuries bound to masters, to Helsing, to humanity, to my own cursed existence. I didn't endure all that just to trade one leash for another." The bloodthirster tilted its head, almost curious. "You refuse apotheosis, you who are already damned." "I'm damned on my terms." Alucard raised the Kasul. "Not yours, not Khorne's, not anyone's but mine." "Then die screaming." The demon moved with speed that transcended physics, closing the distance in a single bound. Its axe descended with force, enough to split continents, wreathed in warp flame that could unmake existence itself. Alucard dodged, barely, the blade missing him by centimeters and carving a trench 50 meters deep into the scarred earth. He fired the castle point blank into the demon's chest. The blessed silver rounds, blessed by what authority he couldn't say, but his guns had always carried their own sanctification, punched through brass armor and demon flesh. The bloodthirster roared, more in fury than pain, black ichor spraying from the wounds. "You bleed," Alucard observed with satisfaction. "Good. I was worried you'd be boring." The demon's whip lashed out, wrapping around Alucard's torso and burning. Not physical fire. This was the fire of damnation itself, the punishment reserved for souls condemned to eternal torment. Alucard screamed as his flesh blackened and cracked, his regeneration struggling against damage that attacked both body and essence simultaneously. The bloodthirster dragged him close, axe raised for the killing blow. "Khorne offers mercy. Submit, and the pain ends." Alucard's scream transformed into laughter, broken, agonized, but genuine. Mercy, from a god who demands skulls, from a deity whose entire existence is built on violence. His eyes blazed crimson through the pain. I'll show you what mercy looks like. He released his familiars, all of them. 3,424,667 souls erupted from his being in a tsunami of screaming shadows. They manifested as spectral warriors, transparent yet tangible, armed with the weapons of their deaths: swords, guns, claws, teeth. The horde surrounded the bloodthirster in layers of grasping hands and vengeful spirits, each one carrying a fragment of Alucard's will, each one hungry for the violence that had defined their existence. The warp screamed. Demons throughout the sector turned their attention to Viridia Prime, sensing the sudden feast of unbound souls. Reality cracked further, more rifts opening, lesser demons pouring through. Bloodletters with hell-forged blades, flesh hounds baying for blood, juggernauts trampling the earth beneath brazen hooves. And in the midst of it all, Alucard stood eye to eye with the bloodthirster, his familiars swarming the demon like piranhas on wounded prey. They couldn't destroy it. Demons were immortal by nature, killable only temporarily. But they could hurt it, drag it down through sheer overwhelming numbers. "This is my army," Alucard said, his voice layered with millions of dead voices. "These are my damned. They serve me, not your blood god, not your chaos, me." The bloodthirster fought with apocalyptic fury, its axe reaping through familiars by the hundreds, its whip disintegrating souls with each crack. But for every familiar destroyed, Alucard simply manifested another, pulling from his seemingly inexhaustible reservoir. The demon was powerful, perhaps powerful enough to win eventually. But this was a war of attrition, and Alucard had been waging those for centuries. Around them, the war continued. Imperial Guard forces stared in horror at the demonic incursion spreading across the battlefield. Chaos cultists screamed prayers of devotion as their gods manifested in the materium. Artillery fire from both sides converged on the epicenter of the warp breach, shells detonating against demon flesh and spectral warriors alike. Epistolary Kalen arrived with a squad of Crimson Fists, teleported directly to the battlefield via Thunderhawk insertion. He took one look at the escalating demonic manifestation and understood immediately. This was the catastrophe he'd warned about. The vampire had been pushed too far, forced to reveal his full power, and now the warp was exploiting the breach. "Purge the manifestation," he commanded psychically, his force staff blazing with power. The Space Marines opened fire with blessed bolter rounds, targeting both demons and familiars indiscriminately. Each detonation banished spectral warriors back into Alucard's being, but also wounded him in the process. Every destroyed familiar was a piece of himself torn away. Alucard felt it, the danger of losing control. His familiars were fighting on two fronts now, against demons and against Imperial forces. The war pressed harder against reality with each passing second, sensing opportunity in the chaos. If he didn't end this soon, the breach would expand beyond even his ability to contain. He made a choice. Pulling his familiars back cost him, not physically, but metaphysically. Souls that had been touched by demon claws, contaminated by warp energy, screamed as he reabsorbed them. The corruption tried to spread, to infect his core being, but Alucard's will was absolute. He crushed the taint, burned it away with the sheer force of his refusal to submit, but the effort left him gasping. The bloodthirster, freed from the swarm, raised its axe in triumph. "You cannot win, vampire. The blood god is eternal. Your defiance only delays." Alucard shot it in the face. The castle's round punched through the demon's eye socket and detonated inside its skull. The bloodthirster staggered, howling in fury and pain. Alucard advanced, drawing his second handgun, the Jackal, even larger and more destructive than the castle, designed to kill regenerating monsters. "I don't need to win," Alucard said, firing repeatedly into the demon's torso. Each impact tore away chunks of brass armor and demonic flesh. "I just need to prove I'm not worth the effort." He emptied both magazines into the bloodthirster, then holstered the weapons and drew his combat knife, a laughable weapon compared to the demon's axe, but in his hands, deadly enough. He leaped, using shadows to propel himself, and drove the blade into the bloodthirster's throat. The demon didn't die, couldn't die, not permanently, but it dissolved, banished back to the warp by accumulated damage and sheer frustrated rage. Its final words echoed across the battlefield. "This is not over, vampire. Khorne never forgets, never forgives." "Good," Alucard whispered to the dissipating essence. "I'd hate for things to get boring." The warp breach collapsed with a sound like reality sighing in relief. The lesser demons, deprived of their anchor point, began dissolving back into the immaterium. Across the battlefield, both Imperial and Chaos forces stared in stunned silence at the vampire standing in the crater where a bloodthirster had been moments before. Kalen approached cautiously, force staff still active. "You rejected Khorne's offer." "Obviously." Alucard turned to face him, blood still steaming on his coat. "Did you think I'd submit to your universe's petty gods? I thought you'd take the power. Most would. Most are fools." Alucard lit a cigarette, a habit from his human days, pointless for a vampire but comfortingly mortal. "I've been a slave, a monster, a weapon. I won't be those things again, not even for godhood." Kalen studied him for a long moment, psychic senses probing. What he found was complex. The vampire was wounded, contaminated with warp taint that would take time to purge, but fundamentally unchanged, still defiant, still dangerous, still other. The Inquisition won't accept this. You've proven you can open warp breaches. That makes you a catastrophic threat. Then they can try to stop me. Alucard smiled, fangs glinting. "I'll be waiting." He walked away from the battlefield, leaving the Crimson Fists to clean up the residual demons and deal with the political fallout. Behind him, millions had witnessed his rejection of chaos, his battle against a bloodthirster, his impossible existence. The legends were already beginning to spread. The Imperium's response to the Viridia Prime incident was as predictable as it was excessive. Within a month, Alucard found himself declared excommunicate traitorous, a threat to be eliminated on sight by any Imperial force. His description circulated through astropathic relays across a dozen sectors. Crimson coat, orange-tinted glasses, impossible regeneration, commander of spectral armies. Shoot on sight. Purge without hesitation. The Emperor's judgment was absolute. Alucard found it hilarious. He moved through Imperial space like a ghost, never staying long enough for kill teams to corner him, always one step ahead of inquisitorial strike forces. He haunted Forge worlds and Agri worlds, Shrine worlds and Death worlds, leaving behind a trail of confused reports and contradictory sightings. Sometimes he helped, destroying Genestealer cults before they could metastasize, eliminating Chaos cultists with surgical precision. Other times, he simply vanished into the void, his motives as opaque as his crimson eyes. The pattern was deliberate. Alucard was learning the Imperium's rhythms, understanding its Byzantine bureaucracy and labyrinthine power structures. He studied how faith powered their war machines, how belief shaped their reality in ways both subtle and profound. The Emperor, that corpse god sustained by daily sacrifice, was more than propaganda. He was a real psychic force, his consciousness somehow spanning the galaxy despite his physical body's deterioration. It fascinated Alucard almost as much as it disgusted him. His understanding of the warp deepened with each encounter. The Immaterium wasn't just a parallel dimension, it was emotion given form, belief made manifest, the collective unconscious of every psychic species in the galaxy distilled into a roiling ocean of possibility and nightmare. His familiars, those millions of souls bound to his being, existed in a liminal space between the warp and reality. They were sustained by his will rather than the Chaos God's power, making them simultaneously vulnerable and incorruptible. But the corruption from Viridia Prime lingered. Several hundred souls within his reservoir carried warp taint, whispers of Khorne's influence that he couldn't fully purge. They were quarantined within his psyche, isolated from the rest, but he could feel them, angry, restless, demanding blood sacrifice in ways that went beyond simple vampiric hunger. It was a cancer, slow-growing but persistent. He needed a solution. The solution found him on a nameless moon, orbiting a dead star, in a place where reality grew thin, and the veil between Materium and Immaterium was gossamer delicate. The Eldar came silently, their wraithbone ship materializing from the webway with the grace of a falling feather. They were Harlequins, the laughing gods chosen, warriors and performers who walked between comedy and tragedy with equal facility. Their Shadowseer, a psyker whose mask displayed a constantly shifting expression, approached Alucard with cautious curiosity. When she spoke, her voice was layered with harmonics that suggested multiple meanings nested within each word. The dead who walks, the drinker undying, the Mon K who refused Khorne's blessing. She tilted her masked head. You are an anomaly, vampire. You should not exist in this reality, yet here you stand, corrupted but not consumed. And your Eldar, Alucard replied, studying her with equal interest. The dying race, makers of their own doom through excess and hubris. Tell me, how does it feel, knowing you birthed a god of depravity? The Shadowseer laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a graveyard. With brutal self-awareness, I assure you, we do not forget Slaaneish's birth, nor the crime of our ancestors that spawned She Who Thirsts. But you, she gestured toward him with a hand wrapped in psychoreactive ribbons. You carry Khorne's taint, willingly contaminating your soul reservoir. Why not simply destroy the infected spirits? They're mine, Alucard said simply. I don't discard pieces of myself, no matter how damaged. Admirable. Foolish, but admirable. The Shadowseer stepped closer, her psychic presence washing over him like moonlight through stained glass. The webway protects us from the warp's direct touch. Your familiars, properly quarantined within the webway structure, could be cleansed, slowly, carefully, over decades, perhaps centuries. And what price would the Eldar ask for such charity? No charity. Trade. Her mask shifted to display a calculating expression. You rejected chaos despite its power. You fight demons without imperial sanction. You are useful in your chaotic way. The Harlequins could use an agent who exists outside the Imperium's chains and beyond chaos's corruption. Alucard considered this. Alliance with Xenos was heresy by Imperial standards, but he'd been declared heretical regardless. The Eldar, for all their arrogance and manipulation, were at least honest about their self-interest. No false promises of paradise, no demands for worship, just pragmatic cooperation between entities who shared common enemies. I work alone, he said finally, but I can work alongside others when our interests align. You cleanse my taint, I assist with problems requiring direct solutions. No oaths, no bindings, just mutually beneficial arrangement. The Shadow Seer's mask displayed something approaching a smile. The laughing god appreciates pragmatism almost as much as poetry. Agreed, dead who walks. But know this, the Imperium will see any cooperation with us as proof of your damnation. The Inquisition's pursuit will intensify. Let them come. Alucard's smile was all fangs. I haven't had a proper hunt in weeks. 6 months later, on a world called Kirador's Rest, the final confrontation began. The Inquisition had assembled a kill force specifically designed to end Alucard's existence. 3 squads of Grey Knights, the demon-hunting space marines whose very presence could banish warp entities. A full complement of Sisters of Battle from the Order of the Ebon Chalice, armed with blessed flamers and faith made manifest, and leading them all a figure Alucard recognized from intelligence gathered across a dozen worlds. Inquisitor Lord Valdane of the Ordo Malleus. A man who had banished demon princes, destroyed corrupted space marine chapters, and ordered exterminatus on 7 worlds without hesitation. His armor was a masterwork of artificer craftsmanship, covered in purity seals and warding sigils. His weapon was a Nemesis Force sword, a blade that could cut through reality itself and destroy souls permanently. They met in Kirador's Cathedral of the Golden Throne, a massive structure dedicated to the Emperor's glory. 10,000 candles burned eternally, tended by servitors whose humanity had been replaced with mechanical devotion. Stained glass windows depicted the Emperor's greatest triumphs, the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, his final battle with Horus. Alucard stood before the cathedral's central altar, hands in his pockets, utterly relaxed despite the army arrayed against him. "You've led us on quite the chase, vampire," Valdane said, his voice amplified by his armor's vox grills. "But it ends here. You cannot regenerate from what we've brought. Is that so?" Alucard glanced around at the assembled forces, easily 200 warriors, each one a veteran of countless battles, each one armed with weapons designed to kill the unkillable. "You know, I appreciate the effort. Truly. It's been ages since anyone put this much thought into killing me. You rejected chaos, yet you consort with Xenos. You possess powers that reek of warp corruption, yet you use them against demons. You are a contradiction, an impossibility." Valdane leveled his force sword. "In the Emperor's name, I end you." The Grey Knights advanced, their nemesis weapons blazing with psychic fire. The Sisters of Battle chanted hymns of hatred, their flamers igniting with blessed promethium. Valdane himself channeled his psychic might through his blade, preparing a strike that would obliterate Alucard's soul reservoir and destroy him beyond any regeneration. Alucard simply smiled. "You still don't understand what I am," he said softly. "I'm not a demon, not a warp entity, not something you can banish or bind." His shadows began to rise, coiling around him like serpents. "I'm something your universe has never encountered before, a monster from beyond your reality's borders, and I've had 6 months to learn your tricks." He moved. Not with speed, with impossibility. One moment he stood before the altar, the next he was among the Grey Knights, his Kasul and Jackal drawn, firing rounds that punched through ceramite and force fields with equal ease. The blessed ammunition shouldn't have worked against warriors, protected by the Emperor's own blessing. But Alucard's weapons carried their own sanctification, older, stranger, divorced from the Imperium's faith. A Grey Knight's nemesis blade carved through Alucard's torso, the psychic weapon destroying his internal organs completely. He regenerated mid-swing, reforming around the blade, catching the warrior's helmet and twisting with strength that matched gene-forged muscle. The helmet crumpled, the warrior inside gasping as his air supply cut off. "Better," Alucard acknowledged, releasing the warrior and spinning to face the next attack. But not enough. Sisters of Battle unleashed their flamers, holy fire washing over him in a wave of purifying agony. He screamed, genuine pain, the Emperor's blessing burning through his corrupted flesh, but didn't fall. Instead, he dove into his own shadow, emerging behind the sisters' formation and catching two in an embrace that became a feeding frenzy. Their blood filled his mouth, carrying with it the taste of absolute faith and zealous devotion. "Delicious," he murmured, dropping their drained corpses. "Your belief actually flavors the blood. Fascinating." Valdane struck then, his force sword cutting through reality and soul simultaneously. The blade connected with Alucard's chest, and for a moment, a single, crystalline instant, the vampire felt true mortality. The weapon was unmaking him, destroying not just body but essence, erasing his existence from reality's fabric. Then his familiars responded. They didn't manifest physically. He'd learned that lesson on Viridia Prime. Instead, they acted as shields, sacrificing themselves to absorb the soul-destroying attack. Dozens vanished in heartbeats, unmade by the Nemesis weapon's power, but their sacrifice bought him precious seconds to retreat, to regenerate, to reassess. "You're using your victims as armor," Valdane said, horrified understanding dawning. "Every soul you've consumed, every life you've taken, they're fuel for your immortality. Now you're getting it." Alucard's coat was in tatters, his body riddled with injuries that regenerated sluggishly. He'd underestimated the Grey Knight's power, the Sisters' faith, Valdane's skill. This wasn't a fight he could win through overwhelming force. But here's the thing, Inquisitor. I've been the monster for so long, I've forgotten how to be anything else. And monsters, we don't know when to quit. The battle raged for 17 minutes. Grey Knights fell, their psychic barriers overwhelmed by Alucard's relentless assault. Sisters of Battle died screaming hymns of devotion, their faith sustaining them even as his shadows tore them apart. Valdane fought with the skill of centuries, each strike precisely calculated to maximize soul damage, each psychic blast targeted at Alucard's core being. And Alucard learned. He adapted to their tactics, memorized their patterns, understood the rhythm of their faith-powered attacks. The Grey Knight's psychic resonance operated on specific frequencies. He learned to disrupt them. The Sisters' blessed flames burned hottest when backed by collective prayer. He killed the chanters first. Valdane's force sword required momentary concentration before each soul strike. Alucard exploited the microsecond delay. When the dust settled, Alucard stood alone among the corpses, coat soaked in blood, body riddled with wounds that refused to fully heal. Valdane knelt before him, force sword shattered, armor breached in a dozen places, one arm hanging useless. "Kill me," the Inquisitor rasped. "I failed. The Emperor's mercy is execution." Alucard looked down at him, crimson eyes unreadable. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He walked away. "You fought well," he said over his shoulder. "Better than most. You actually made me work for it." He paused at the cathedral's entrance. "Tell your Imperium I'm not their enemy. I'm not Chaos's champion. I'm just something else. Something that doesn't fit your categories." "They'll never accept that," Valdane said. "You'll be hunted forever." "Good." Alucard's smile was genuine now, tinged with something approaching joy. "I'd hate to get bored." He vanished into the shadows, leaving Valdane alive to deliver the message, a calculated decision that would have consequences across the sector. The vampire who rejected chaos fought alongside Xenos and spared an Inquisitor's life. An anomaly that defied classification, a monster that chose its own path. In the 41st millennium, where faith and fury defined reality, Alucard had carved out a third option: freedom.